Yesterday we began to talk about the avoda of the Soyer Mishtalech. And today we'll continue on page Tes. And we're talking about the Dechia L'tzuk. We have to push the Soyer Mishtalech off the precipice, over the precipice. And at this point, when we're ready to push the Soyer over the precipice, we need to take the Lashon Shel Zahuris that we spoke about yesterday at great length, and we have to split it in half. We have to leave half of it where it was situated from the get-go, originally Bein HaKranayim, between the horns of the goat, and Chetzio, the other half, will be tied down to a large boulder, a sela, on this mountain. By the way, today, there are those who claim, I don't think there's any historical confirmation, that the area, if you've ever traveled on the road to Malei Adumim, you'll see perhaps where they sent the Soyer Mishtalech, that they claim that the reason it's called Adumim is from the blood of the Soyer Mishtalech. But one thing is clear, I think, historically, is that that's the area that they used to climb the mountains, as the Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah, Masi and Masos. In other words, when they declared, this is relevant to today as Rosh Chodesh, when they declared the day as Rosh Chodesh, they had to notify the Jewish people in all the areas. They would light torches from one torch to the other. And they say that those hills, which are called Malei Adumim, that's where they were Masi and Masos. Now what happens? They pushed the Soyer Mishtalech backwards, meaning its face was towards us. They pushed it over the tzuk. And here we have a very interesting halacha that the Mishalech himself, the one who sends the Soyer over the hill, over the top, is Mitame B'godim V'kelim. And this is based on a pasuk in the parsha of Achribos. It says, "V'amishalech es hasoyer lazozil yichabes b'gadov." It means as b'gadim contract tumah, and v'rachatz b'saro b'mayim, and he himself is tameh. The achrichein, after he's tovel himself, then yavo el hamach. Now, according to one opinion, this halacha of Tumah with regard to the Mishalech, that he himself is Tameh and his begadim are contract Tumah, apply immediately when he leaves the environments of the Kodesh of the Mikdash on his way to the Tzuk, to this precipice. The other man, the Omer, says no. It's only when he arrives at the precipice, and there's a third shita that it only applies once he pushes the Soyer over the precipice. Now, we can explain perhaps the two polar extreme shitas. The middle shita doesn't seem to be neither here nor there. It's like a compromise shita. One shita is that the ish iti, the Mishaleach, represents the Kohen Gadol. In fact, the Kohen Gadol does all the avodas, and certainly the Soyer Hapnimi, the Soyer Lashem, he should be doing the Soyer Mishtalech as well. But this halacha that the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to leave the Mikdash. So he sends the Soyer in the hands of a Shliach. And at what point in time can the Kohen Gadol claim that he has done what he has to do? He has fulfilled exactly his obligation. It's the moment that he hands over the Soyer into the hands of the Shliach, and the Shliach leaves the Beis HaMikdash. Once the Shliach leaves the Beis HaMikdash on his way to the Tzuk, as far as the Gavra, the Kohen Gadol, is concerned, he has fulfilled his obligation. And therefore, the shliach, insofar as he embodies the Kohen Gadol, he is sort of a personification or a representation of the Kohen Gadol. The moment he leaves the Mikdash on his way to the Tzuk, he's Makabel Tumah, because at that point the Kohen Gadol has fulfilled his obligation. The other Shita says no. The Avoda has to be fulfilled in its entirety in order for the shliach to say that I now have fulfilled my shlichus. It's not enough to send it out to the desert. He's got to push it off the cliff. And that is the kiyum of the avoda of the Sarah Mishtalech. At that point, once the shliach has fulfilled his responsibility, now his begadim become tamei, because at that point he was Mekayim the Avoda, he implemented the Avoda as he was required to do. The middle Shita, that when it reaches the Tzuk, I mean, that's neither here nor there. It's not the Kiyum of the Kohen Gadol, and it's not even the Kiyum of the Avoda of the Soyer, because the Soyer has to be sent over the Tzuk. It's not enough to bring it to the Tzuk. So that Shita is a Tzarech Iyum. Now let's ask a different question. What happens in the Seder Avoda of the Kohen Gadol immediately after he's Mekayim the Shnei Seirim, the second Soyer, Sar Lazos? At that point, he reads the Torah publicly. And it's very fascinating that Dafka the Kohen Gadol was required, that it's his responsibility to read the Torah on Yom Kippur. I mean, you and I would have said, who needs the Kohen Gadol for that? It's not an avoda per se. But be that as it may, lechatchila, at least, we would prefer if the Kohen Gadol read the Torah. At what point is the Kohen Gadol going to leave the Kodesh Kodshim, go into the Azara, and read the Torah? At the point in which he fulfilled his obligation vis-a-vis the Sarah Mishtaleh. Once he completes that avoda, he can go on to read the Torah. So the Gemara has two opinions, and you'll see this in Rishonim as well. One opinion is that the very moment he gave over the Soyer to the Ish HaMishtalech, at that point the Kohen Gadol could leave the environs and go and read the Torah publicly. The other man, the Amar, says it's only after the Ish Iti, the Sarah Mishtalech, was sent over the precipice. And again, I would think it's the same identical dispute that we mentioned earlier. At what point does this shliach, who represents the Kohen Gadol, fulfill his shlichus? Is it immediately because the Kohen Gadol gave him over the Soyer, and now the rest is just technicalities? Or no, it's more than just technicalities. This is the avoda of the Sarah Mishtalech, to push it off the precipice. And up until that moment, the Kohen Gadol is now being represented, and the avoda is being done by the Ish Iti on behalf of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has not yet fulfilled his obligation. The avoda was not implemented, and the shlichus is not yet chal. And therefore, he cannot read the Torah. He's going to have to wait until after the Soyer is sent over the Tzuk. Now, they didn't have social media, and certainly not on Yom Kippur. How did the Kohen Gadol know exactly when the goat was sent over the precipice? How would he know? They would have to do an umdana, and they would assume that given X amount of time, he reached that precipice and he sent it over. As we discussed at great length, the Ish Iti is allowed to violate Yom Kippur and eat if he needs to eat in order to fulfill his shlichus. And that's why there were stations, if you remember, Sukkos along the way, and at every couple of Sukkos, they were every couple of miles or let's say every 18 minutes, they would have another sukkah and ask him if he had to eat that food and drink prepared for him. Hasoyer misgalgel v'yoreh. Right, the Soyer is now rolling down the mountain. Below hoya magil chatzi ahar, ad shahoya nase evar mevar. In other words, we can usually assume that even before the sire reaches the bottom of this cliff, he's already dead. And Nasei Varma Varm, his body has already been broken up. And this is a Mishnah here in Masechta Yoma on Daf Samach Vav. Lo meis hasoyer, in event that the soyer did not die, then the Mishalech Yored Achrav, he's got to lower himself down the mountain. Umemiso bechol davar shehu. In other words, the avoda is not fulfilled until the soyer is dead. Now, what happens if all goes well the moment the avoda of the soyer is complete and the soyer dies? Hayalashon shel zahuris malbin. You remember that we tied half of the lashon shel zahuris, which is scarlet, it's dyed red, on the sela, on this boulder at the precipice. That scarlet color will miraculously turn white. And at that point, we knew that the Sarah Mishtaleach achieved its goal, and it was indicative of the kapara of Klal Yisrael. However, there's one mandiyom in the Gemara on Daf Samach from Yehuda that Hoyamalbin, at what moment in time did the scarlet ribbon turn white? Miyad kshegia soil midbar. And why? Why is it that the moment the soil reached the desert, in other words, you left the environs of the Mikdash, you entered into the desert? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds Shemiyad shegia legizbar lemidbar kvar nishlama mitzvahs hashilua. That when the Sarah Mishalech is brought out into the midbar, at that point, the Kohen Gadol has fulfilled his obligation because the Shliach is now completed his Shlichus. Once the Avoda is considered complete and the Mishalech, in this case the Kohen Gadol, has fulfilled his obligation, at that point the Kapara was clinched. And now there's a separate mitzvah to send the Azazel over the cliff. So what's fascinating here is that this shita of Rabbi Yehuda would undermine everything we think about the Sarah Shalech, namely that the kapara of Klal Yisrael is a result of the death of the Sire. We are way before the death of the Sire, and already the scarlet ribbon has turned white, and the kapara was clinched. So there's a halachic kiyum, a definition, a legal definition of kiyum mitzvahs shiluach, and whenever that halachic kiyum has been achieved, at that point the kapara is clinched. The Yadu HaKolchin is Kapru Avodoseim Shel Yisrael. The change in the color of the ribbon from scarlet to white was an indication that Hashem brought about the kapara on behalf of Klal Yisrael. Ulamachras hayam mishalech bo lifnei kohen gadol v'yomalo mechaye chayim asinu shlichusa. Chaim is like a lashon of a shvua. I can take an oath that I fulfilled your shlichus. Now, this last piece is based on a Mishnah later on, and it reflects a rule in shlichus of chazra shliach etzel hamishalech etzel abaylam, that a shliach always has to go back to the mishalech to tell him, to report to him that he fulfilled the shlichus. Now, the reason why he's waiting till the next day is apparently because it's too much to ask him to retrace his steps on this day of Yom Kippur and go all the way back to the Kohen Gadol. But we see one thing clearly, that the Kohen Gadol doesn't have to know about it on Yom Kippur. You can find out the next day. On Yom Kippur, he's a little in the dark. He doesn't know if the shlichus was fulfilled or not, but he can rely on the shliach that he would be makayim his shlichus. I once heard from Rav Soloveitchik a pele, an amazing insight and a pure chidush as to how this Soyer Mishalech operates to bring kapar for Klali. So what exactly is the chidush here, is the kapara element of the Soyer? After all, we have a principle called Itzumo Shal Yom Machaper, which means that the day itself is Machaper. And the Rambam writes that Bismana said that we don't have the Migdosh, we don't have the Soyer Mishalech, the day itself is Machaper. So if there's potential inherent in the day to bring about kapara, why do we need this Soyer? And Rav Soloveitchik based himself on a very, very strange Ramban. Ramban is commentary in Torah in Parshas Achremos, and I think I may have mentioned this in the past, says that the Soyer is somehow connected to Azazel. Azazel is a celestial malach that represents the sar of the powers of the Sitra Achra, some sort of other powers. And Rav Soloveitchik was very bothered by this Ramban. He says to give a gift of a carbon to a malach, to a divine angel, is avodah zarah. We don't worship angels. I mean, if you or I saw an angel, I guess we'd get a little bit overwhelmed by it. We'd be shocked. But with all due respect, we don't bow down to angels. So there's a whole discussion about Yoshua, who bowed down to an angel. How is he allowed to do that? So how could it be that we're bringing a gift to the Sar, this celestial malach who's called Azazel? So again, there are parts of what Rav Soloveitchik said that require an hour or two of introduction. There's something called Mekudeshes Midin Aref, that if you want to give a gift to a wife, to a woman, and that should be Kesef Kedushin, she could tell you to give it to somebody else, and it's as if she got it, if you follow her instructions. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who's receiving our gift. He tells us to deliver the Azazel, the Soyer, to the Saro Shalal, or whoever he is. But in that sense, we're really giving the gift to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But again, that's a long discussion, which is called Mekudeshes Midin Aref. But Rav Soloveitchik came up with a really, really new idea, novel idea as to what the Soyer holds within it to power. And just to give you the tip of the iceberg, he says that even though Yisurim Mechaprim, we can achieve kapara, never through Yisurim, through suffering, physical suffering. But that makes sense if God meted out punishment, and onesh is mechaper. So if we had a terrible experience, then that's how Hashem is meting out punishment. There are many experiences that we have that we bring upon ourselves, 1,001 anxieties that are self-inflicted because we live in a state of anxiety. Why should that be a mechaper? And that's Rav Soloveitchik's opinion. The greatness of the Soyer Mishtaleach is the Azazel here are those anxieties, those psychological fears that we create, figments of imagination that we bring upon ourselves. And whenever I think of that over the course of this last year, I'm always reminded of a psak of Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky Shlita, the Rashiv in Philly, in Philadelphia. And he says that we should not be publicizing on a regular basis the mortality rate of corona, because it's going to create psychological fears and anxieties that might do us under. And he's of the opinion that the Gemara calls it b'tzkusa, that sometimes you could die from fear. Just the fact that you're afraid of something could bring about your death. I'm very happy that here in my neighborhood, the whole attitude has changed now. You know, people are not wearing masks. Some are, some aren't. Some wear it over here, over the chin. You know, some wear it on their head. I don't know. I'm exaggerating, but it's it's called bichvin, and there's a general feeling of security in the area. Again, I hope it'll stay that way, and we won't be hit with any surprises. But in Mitzvah Hashem, I think we're on the way. We're on the right path. But anxiety plays a tremendous role in our health. I don't have to tell you that. And the pella of the kapara of the Sarah Mishtachet, Sarah Lazazel, is to take all those anxieties that we bring upon ourselves, all those states of fear, sometimes fear of the unknown, trauma, and so forth, and that becomes a mechaper under the law of Yisur mechaper. And for that, we have to give a gift to the Azazel who engenders within us all these fears. And finally, he says, "A mosei akapor ma'akeves b'soyer." The Torah says, "Asar shel ola olav hagoro lazazel yomad chai lifnei Hashem l'chaper olav." And what does this mean, yomad chai? Rabbi Yehuda holds this on Daf Mem. L'chaper olav. What is the kapara of the soil azazel? Is kaparas damim, which again, damim in this case is a reference to the soil Hashem, whose dam is sprinkled on the mizbeach or lifnai v'lifnim in the Kodshim. So it's a partnership here, a symbiotic relationship in which the matan damim of the soil Hashem effectuates the kapara power of the soil azazel. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So when the Torah says kapara lechaper olav, it's kapar's damin, but not the dam of the soil azazel, but the dam of the soil Hashem. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. I'm sorry, Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon holds kapara, it's kapar's dvarim, that when the Kohen Gadol recites vidui over the head of the Sar Lazazel, Sar Mishtaleach, that gives the power and injects within the Sair the ability when it's sent out to be mechaper klar. So it's the vidui, that's called kapar's dvarim. L'das Rabbi Yehuda, ikar kapar sarya mishtalechi b'amidoso chai b'shas hazos. In other words, the kapar of the sarya mishtaleach is effectuated at the moment of the zrikas dam of the sarya Hashem. And therefore, when the Torah says Ya'amad chai, that the sarya azazel should be erected, he should be standing alive, it means alive at the moment of hazos. And again, hazos of what? Hazos of the Soil Hashem. The Eina Avodos Shaliachachem Akvos is Kaporas HaSoil. Whatever happens later after the Avodah, the Dam of the Soil Hashem, that's enough to clinch the Kapara. Anything beyond that is a mitzvah and a chova, but it's not relevant to the kapara. Rabbi Yehuda ain't tzarich lahavi soyer acher. Let's say the soyer amishtalech would die before it gets to the tzuk. According to Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yehuda, who cares if it dies? As long as it was alive at the moment of the hazas dam of the Sar Lashem. What happens to Sar Lazazel afterwards is irrelevant because it was Yom Ad Chag. However, Lidas Rabbi Shimon, Iker Kaparas HaSoyer, Hu Avidui Al HaSoyer, the Kapara power inherent in the Sar is inherent in the Vidui. Lefichach in Meis Kodem Vidui, Sarach Lahavi Soyer Acher Tachta. We have to replace the Soyer with a second Sar that's alive and well, so that we can recite Vidu. So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, comes out if the Sawyer dies before the Azaz Dam of the Sar Lashem, then we'd have to replace the Sawyer. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if the Sar Mishlech dies before the Vidui, then we'd have to replace it. The power of Kaparas Hasor is not dependent, as we would have thought, on the death of the Sar Mishtalech once it goes over the precipice. No. Either the Kapara is clinched when the Sar is standing at the time of the Azaz Dam HaSoyer Al Hashem, or the critical moment is the moment of Vidui, and we couldn't care less if the Sire dies after the Vidui and before it gets taken up the mountain and sent off the peak of the mountain. I shouldn't say we couldn't care less because it still is a mitzvah to do the avoda, but in terms of kapara, the kapara is clinched simply by the fact that this Sa'ir was there at the time of Vidu, according to Rashi. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda, or liachar shekvar isvada ala mishtalech, which means Rabbi Shimon. Ein tzarich lahavi soyer acher l'divrei hakol. Everybody will agree there's no need to replace the soyer. Okay, then, so that's as far as